You're listening to Civic from the San Francisco Public Press. On this edition, we'll hear how a peer-to-peer, community-based organization works to empower young people who've had contact with the criminal justice system.
I see you in juvenile hall. I see you in the streets. I see you at this community event. I may even be in the court waiting room passing out flyers. So it's something that's consistent. I'm also like a native San Franciscan. I may even know somebody in your community. Just consistency over time. I remember there was this young person that was incarcerated, and she really reminded me of myself too. But I remember it took me a year to build up a relationship with this person and be consistent and to develop trust.
I'm Laura Wennis, and this is Civic. In the streets, in jails, and in other detention facilities, and at its program sites around the Bay Area, the Young Women's Freedom Center meets girls, women, and transgender and gender non-conforming people where they're at. The centers provide resources and support and help navigate the system and develop their voices. From there, they provide training, internships, fellowships, and jobs that pay. This is a peer program, meaning that the people from the center who are doing that outreach to those who have been impacted by cycles of poverty, exploitation, violence, and incarceration have shared experiences. One of the center's core tenets is the belief that people who are affected by these systems are the ones that can and must lead effective change. Julia Arroyo-Guzman is one of those leaders. She's a site director for Young Women's Freedom Center, and we talked about her journey to that position and the work that she does now. I would like to give listeners a sense of what the Young Women's Freedom Center does. I know that you do a couple different kinds of outreach in a variety of different places and ways. Where might a person encounter staff from the center, and what kinds of interactions would they be having?
People will probably see the Young Women's Freedom Center inside of lockdown facilities, in the streets, at public events, probably at City Hall, on the steps of the City Hall, probably in Sacramento at the Capitol, organizing, doing lobby visits.
What kind of interactions are they going to have with somebody who, say, is on the streets?
Typically, you're probably going to see somebody that's a peer that's probably been hired at the center. So kind of like what our roots are, right? In 1993, we started out as the Street Survival Project. So we were trained as street-based outreach workers, and we did needle exchange, things like that. And really, the focus was on health. And throughout the years, we were able to continue that. And even to this day, it's the same kind of vibe that you have folks going out there just doing outreach for different organizing events, just to come in and get involved in some of our programming on the inside, maybe a coalition meeting.
Mm-hmm. And compare that to the kinds of lobbying that you're doing at Sacramento. What kind of interaction would you be having with somebody there, the legislator, for example?
Probably trying to shift narrative or to just open up a conversation about things that impact our community.
How did you first get involved with the center?
It was about 2000, and I was about 15 years old, and I had been picked up for something with like shoplifting or something like that. And I found myself incarcerated inside a juvenile hall. Through that experience of being inside of that facility, I had heard this woman come in at the time, Latifah Simon. She was just basically telling about her story in a very loose kind of way. And the way she spoke to us, she kind of got my attention rather than everybody else inside of the facility. I had a lot of people that were coming to interview me or talk with me. And I almost felt like the Charlie Brown teacher where it was like, want, 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 want. And, but when this woman came in and she stood in front of everybody and she just kept it real. And she also spoke about something, it was a little bit political. It wasn't just like she was like confessing her story or something. Mm-hmm. It was like she was connecting it to larger structural issues that were happening. And I kind of could vibe with that. She was talking about the crack generation, the AIDS epidemic, and things like that. And I was born in 1985, just at the beginning of those things. And I was seeing the impacts in my community and on my parents even. I was in there and I was like, who's this lady? And she's kind of like speaking my story a little bit. And so it was that piece of it where that was the kind of seed that was planted for me. And, I just went on and I stayed inside of that, in and out of that facility until my 18th birthday.
Wow.
And I never once committed another offense.
That is amazing.
Not once did I ever commit another offense. It was all status offenses after that, of like just basically not having access to housing and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And, you don't have access to housing. You're moved around from place to place. So school's not as consistent, things like that. All those things can bring you to recidivate. So the majority of folks in there it's not multiple offenses that you're in there for. It's really just one thing. And then you become this kind of welfare kind of case that keeps you in the cycle of being incarcerated. I don't know. I'm speaking for myself too.
Yeah.
Everybody's a little bit different, but for the most.
Can you talk more about what a status offense is? Because I think for people who have not had contact with the system, it's like a little eye-opening to realize exactly how strict the rules are that can lead you to go back to juvenile hall if you've been in before.
Well, I mean, for status offenses, there's things that you can be incarcerated for as a juvenile that you can't be for an adult. So if there's something like you don't show up to school, you go to court, that's a condition of your probation, was that you needed to have perfect attendance, you can be remanded back into court. There's the magic thing where you go into your placement, it's your birthday, you want to go out for the weekend. Any normal teenage thing, you want to go spend the night at your friend's house. So if you leave that placement, that's a violation of your probation because you need to be under the supervision of that placement.
Placement meaning your home that you're like placed in.
Court appointed to. Mm-hmm. So if you leave that placement for the weekend, then that means that's a violation. So you have to go in. And
so you can basically go back to juvenile hall for a sleepover.
Yeah, for a sleepover. Exactly.
Wow.
And one of the things is when I left, I always showed up to school on Monday. That was one thing that I knew is even if I left on Friday, like, now that I'm an adult, I'm like, oh, wow, teenagers do this regularly, but it was seen as a criminal offense as a juvenile. So anyway, I had had this experience of being kind of in and out of this facility. Eventually, when I got out, what kind of drew me to the organization was the fact that they kept talking about the underground street economy. And something about that language, because I was somebody that had the experience of being exploited out on the streets. And so I did have that experience. So something about that kind of it humanized me, and it gave me kind of like dignity in the way that they broke it down. Like there was larger like structural issues that, kept folks having to figure out, children having to figure out how to live and survive and take care of themselves. And I eventually ended up coming in through the program of Young Mothers United. And at the time, I was struggling with like being houseless, and I was getting ready to give birth to my daughter.
How old were you?
At this time, I was like 25 at this time. So I ended up coming in to the organization and taking some of their parenting classes. But when I came in there, folks were actually welcomed me inside of the space. And I felt for the first time, I remember somebody had told me congratulations inside of there. And it wasn't something that I had heard at all. And nobody had spoke to me that way. And when I spoke, folks leaned in and kind of looked at me like, wow, you have so much knowledge about the process in which this works. And I felt like I had a voice and like I had power inside of the space. And another thing that was introduced to me at the time was about policy. There was we were working on the anti-shackling bill because we were talking about other mothers that had been incarcerated at the time of giving birth, and that they were shackled up to the beds. And we had worked on this Young Mother's Bill of Rights. And so this was the first time, too, that I was doing this individual transformation thing and then still working on community transformation. And it was like those things could happen at the same time was something that I didn't think that was like traditionally. I was almost brought up thinking that I was a bad kid.
Right.
You know, I was thinking I was bad, so there couldn't be anything that would come of good of me. And at this point, I felt like I was contributing to something. And that's how I came to the organization. And
so that was over the course of many years, right? If you first heard about the center from Latifah Simon showing up at juvenile hall when you were like 15, 16 or whatever, and then, you know, at 25 when you were becoming a parent, then you came back to the organization?
Well, I had been working with them prior to that too, but this is when I really started to do, I think, more of my personal work with them. I had worked on there was the Girls Initiative back in the day, and I had gotten an opportunity to work at another organization, but I was actually partnering with the center at the time. They had just came out with this No Justice Handbook, and I was working with other girls that had been through the underground street economy, particularly like involved with like sex work or being exploited and things like that. And that was basically, it was gender specific services at the time. So I had gotten a little bit involved at that time as well in some of the work that they were doing.
Do you see that also holding true for other people who are getting reached out to by the center now? That, it might take a couple of different contacts before they kind of come in on their own and are like, I really want to get more involved with this.
Oh, I absolutely know that's part of like the secret sauce.
Yeah.
Because like I know so many, as somebody that's moved through the organization and done the outreach, I see you in juvenile hall. I see you in the streets. I see you at this community event. I may even be in the court waiting room passing out flyers, so it's something that's consistent. I'm also like a native San Franciscan. I may even know somebody in your community. So,
right.
So that's the piece that just consistency over time. I remember just one example. I remember there was this young person that was incarcerated, and she really reminded me of myself too. But I remember it took me a year to build up a relationship with this person and be consistent and to develop trust and things like that. So, So anyways, after, a lot of folks hear that we have internship where you can become this outreach worker, because the piece that draws folks in is that you see somebody that may be a little bit ahead of you in their personal transformation. So for me, I did see other people from my community that were employed at the organization. Actually, Marlene Sanchez, at the time, she was becoming the executive director, and she was somebody from my neighborhood. So it was somebody that you could kind of see a reflection of yourself, right? You could see that you could aspire to be something outside of the 3-block radius of which you maybe haven't really moved from, So that was something that was very true for me, is I didn't leave the neighborhood. Like, that's the place that I always went back to. Yeah, so being able to see folks that were doing other things, and also the piece about the policy work was something that was, even when I had took a step back, I knew that I had did other things in my life. I knew I had traveled to Washington, D.C. and worked on policy over there. And I knew that there was something else. The center, I went to the United Nations with the center at one point. What could I possibly contribute to this conversation where there's women from China and India and different parts of Africa just all talking about their experience of being seen as a second-class citizen just as a girl, and how that was all connected really just opened my horizons about whatever else was possible in life.
Yeah. But then I imagine you did have something to contribute, and you know that now, right?
Absolutely.
So can you talk about what that interaction was like? I mean, going to the UN and having all these connections all of a sudden with people from around the world who are talking about that basic level of being made to feel less than.
Yeah. So I mean, there was things happening here. I mean, I don't think it was about whose oppression was the worst or whatever it was. It was just the different forms of oppression that was being presented to all of us, and like all of the hardships that everybody was moving through. And I actually did do some organizing work where we were sent to London, of all places, to go work with delegates from all over the world, women from India. And we also took a look at the Unifying Bill of Rights, that the Freedom Charter that we actually have today. We even looked at it and compared it to women that what they were experiencing all around the world. And when I say women, I mean women, trans men, and gender expansive folks too. So just looking at all the things that we were facing everywhere. So.
And is there a lot in common? I'm guessing the answer is yes.
Yes, absolutely. There was the rights for, anybody wants the rights to be able to be their full self, and the right to have access to education, healthcare. There were things that were in some ways different. There was the female genital mutilation that I seen as something that I hadn't experienced in that form, but I had experienced other forms of violence as well. So it was just seeing those and hearing about those things also that's happening.
I'm speaking with Julia Arroyo-Guzman, site director for Young Women's Freedom Center. You said something earlier about your individual transformation and community transformation being linked. Can you talk about that a little bit more? How were you noticing yourself transforming as you transformed your community?
I think the piece where I knew that, I think it came over, I think parts of people just believing in me. I think that was the thing, because I had been the person on the other end of the street outreach where I can remember, being marginally housed and street outreach workers coming to bring me my birth prenatal vitamins and giving me access to like different clinics and things where I could get support in. I remember just working through depression and not having employment or access to food or clothes and those things. So people continuing to humanize me and be able to get to know me and who I was, and sometimes just even having a conversation with me. Over time, of building up trust with these folks, I ended up walking through a few doors and just giving it a try of seeing what there was to offer at these places. And eventually I took some training programs. I took a couple classes and I just went all in. And, a lot of my story is part of my healing journey of being able to try on different methods of like what it will take to address some of the violence and things that I have been through, to be able to work through those things. And one of a major contributor I know is being able to, as somebody that was raised also in foster care, you wonder who you are. And I think that getting introduced to some of my indigenous practices of being an Aztec dancer were very healing for me. Getting to know about my identity and the people that I come from. And because I had seen a generation that had faced so much hardship, I had seen relatives die of AIDS and fall, that were really struggling with substance use and things like that. And to know that I come from really strong people, and that there's sometimes when people get off their path, what we can do is, begin to work on ourselves and do our own healing. And that is almost like the medicine for the next 7 generations. And so I kind of think of that native proverb a lot of like, healing myself heals 7 generations back and 7 generations forward. So yeah, I mean, that was a big piece for me, was being able to get involved with my indigenous practices, and also recovery in myself too and sometimes it works for folks, sometimes it doesn't, but recovery was a big thing for me as well, addressing some of the substance use stuff. And just having an opportunity, because there were people out there that gave me a job.
Right.
They gave me a job, and they gave me leadership opportunities, and they allowed me to advocate for other people, and they invested in me with training. And I am not like one person. There are many other folks that have been through this, and I can see them in San Francisco. It's almost like some people go away to a college and have like a sorority or something, but Young Women's Freedom Center has this siblinghood and sisterhood that's so, like, I can see people in office, and I can see people that are even in their community doing, backpack giveaways or whatever it is, but I can see that essence and that quality of like that comes from the center.
Mm-hmm. What do they train? What do they teach? Because there's things that you can train and teach in in a class or instructor setting, and then there's things that you can't, like your experiences, which it seems to me are one of the most valuable things that you bring to the table in your work.
Yeah, it's really interesting because somebody had asked me what my education background was, and I said, I said it's like a non-traditional education. It's almost like the pedagogy of the oppressed. It's like a liberation like institute, and it's actually what we call it, is the Liberation Institute. Mm-hmm. And so it's something that we're always giving context to our lives, where it's we're in the context of like how our life impacts the world and how the world impacts our lives. And yeah, that's kind of the education that we're coming from. And so there's research that's part of it. There's also people that get certified with the IRB with us to serve as the principal researchers, to be able to do participatory action research.
Institutional Review Board?
Institutional Review Board. Thank you. So, which is actually one of the key components too, is us being able to collect our own research, our own data, and take back the narrative. Yeah. And really be able to tell our story, because people can take data and they can do what they want with it. But just like I had said before about the No Justice Handbook that had came out years ago, that was a really critical book to people. It had language of the system where our parents or our caregivers or the people that were taking care of us, when you get into a courtroom, they're referring to these numbers and 602 and a 703, and you're just like, what's happening? What is this? Yeah. And it was a guide. It was almost like a translation of like, what are they saying? Right. And there was like the do's and don'ts. And this is the type of power that the judge has. This is the type of power that a lawyer has. Like, it was the breakdown of everything. Mm-hmm. And so now where I see it, where we're even evolving and creating more things, is we had the decolonizing model for young folks that are going through the juvenile justice system in San Francisco. So where we were able to collect data from over 100 people it was life mapping that really talked about the lives of a person who goes through the system. And one of the things that was so common that I can absolutely relate to in my own story is that some people had like 10 homes before 10, before 12, that they had so many homes. And that was something that I had experienced. I had multiple homes. I had been in multiple placements. And so
the opposite of stability.
The opposite, exactly. So and there's also another report in plain sight. Yeah, so there's plenty of research and data that people can reference to look at. We study those materials, the research, and then we use those to inform our processes. Even during the pandemic, we surveyed over 280 young people in San Francisco on their specific needs that they were receiving and that they weren't receiving, and there was a multiple of other questions, and we used it to go to the Board of Supervisors to ask on different budget asks there. And while we didn't get all of our asks, we know this to be true because we went out and we did the research ourselves.
Yeah, that is powerful that you have people, holding the data and doing the analysis of it who actually have an understanding, a firsthand experience of the system rather than people who administer the system.
Yes, exactly.
I want to ask about juvenile hall because we've mentioned it and you were there, but San Francisco closed its juvenile hall and
It's
Young
going
Women's
to.
it voted
Yes.
to close it. Sorry.
Yeah.
And that's something that Young Women's Freedom Center was really involved in organizing around and sort of, was sort of like made invisible because
Yeah.
like a big, report came out and then there was this big vote about it. But it's not like that happened in a vacuum. That's something that your organization was really, really involved in. So what is next with that?
Yeah, so I remember when it was just a conversation.
Uh-huh.
And it always, and I feel like it takes the youth voice to show that resistance, like we can do it. We can do it. Sometimes when we get to be adults, we're like, how is that even possible?
But the rules.
Yeah. And they're like, we can do it. We should shut it down. I wish that would just somebody would just shut it down. And then we took the steps to actually make that a reality. And there was a lot of other places that were all in agreement that this has to stop. That jail wasn't housing all the youth in San Francisco. And I say housing because a lot of folks didn't have housing that were there, but it was youth from 3 particular communities in San Francisco that were disproportionately impacted. And we had to be very honest that this place is housing Black youth in San Francisco and brown youth in San Francisco. And that's who it was inside of there. They weren't, so every time they rebuilt that jail, it wasn't for, all the kids in San Francisco. It was very clear that what was happening. So December 2000, at the end of this year in December, the jail is due to close.
2021.
Yes, 2021. Everyone is scrambling to come up with the solutions. The Young Women's Freedom Center is working with Reimagine Youth Justice to make sure that there is the community input and that solutions that are driven by young people. Like their voice needs to be part of this conversation. They should be at the forefront of like what alternative solutions for accountability and things like that they want to see. And also we're trying to push folks to radically reimagine as well, because if you've never seen it done any other way, we have to study it. We have to go research and see how it's done in other places. Did that work? Will it work here? And so because there is going to be a place of confinement for certain offenses, but the jail in general will be closed.
So what happens to the kids who are convicted of those certain offenses?
That's the talk of like where do we put them? Where will those children go? And what the Reimagine Justice Coalition is also trying to push for is like this can be an opportunity for those youth to be able to be exposed to different things. So it just has to be a locked door. So if it's a locked door and it opens up into some type of, I'm just throwing something out there, like some type of healing and, investment in education or entrepreneurship or, mental health or treatment programs or whatever it is inside of this facility that they'll be staying in, then we could really have an opportunity to envision something different for this young person and have them be involved in that. So, So.
And what happens to kids who are not convicted of those certain types of offenses, but who are in juvenile hall now? They have to go somewhere, right?
So there's a number of things. We're hoping for community-based solutions. We're hoping for more local folks to be able to foster or take in young folks. Like I had said before, that I was somebody that didn't have access to housing. My father wanted very badly to have me back in his care, but he was homeless. He didn't have housing. Yeah. And so I remember when sitting inside of a courtroom with my father, and he had told the judge, I want to take her, but I'm so new and fresh in my recovery, and I don't have a home to take her to. Mm-hmm. And, that's... if I could just add in that at that time when I had found out that they actually used $300,000 of tax-paying dollars to incarcerate a youth per youth inside of that facility, I was thinking to myself, wow.
What could my dad do with $300,000
yeah,
a year?
Just like he said about receiving treatment and being able to have reliable housing. I remember he told me he lived in a closet. He rented out a closet in the Tenderloin. And he said, I just couldn't bring you back to that.
No,
He's
of course not.
That's not what I could have.
But then what happened to you?
I went into placements.
Yeah.
I went into one placement, and one placement led into the next placement. But you know what they say? There's no place like home.
Right.
And the love of an environment that whoever you choose to as your caregiver can provide for you. You can't really replicate that. It's hard for an institution to do that because one thing is that nobody can hug you.
Really?
No one can hug you. Nobody's supposed to touch you.
What the?
Unless they're putting you in a restraint. That's the only.
Seriously?
No, you can't get a hug. You can't get a like to be consoled and things like that. Yeah.
Oh my God, I didn't even know that.
I mean, I remember
your
getting
placements when you are getting placed by the court system. They're not allowed to physically touch you.
Yeah, you can't get love and nurturing and compassion for I know that I remember folks devastated when they lose a loved one and they open your door, they tell you, and they slam the door right on you, and that's it.
Oh.
And psych comes and stares at a little hole, and they go, "Are you okay?" And it's like, oh my gosh, it's like the worst feeling in the world.
What if you say no? What are they going to do? Medicate you?
I mean, that's another thing too, is that everybody leaves there but that's a whole nother conversation. So, but the thing is like to me, a response to me is that when a child is struggling is really a reflection as us as a society. So if it's not all of us getting on one accord or being in agreement that it's not one size fits all for everyone. We can't just make a jail and this is going to work for everybody. Like that's not the way that it works.
Well, a lot of people still have the mentality that, people do wrong and they need to be punished. And that's what these facilities are, like punishment.
Yeah.
And if you didn't, I'm not even going to say it, but people's attitudes are that the incarceration should be terrible.
Yeah. So, I mean, we talk about accountability a lot, and what accountability can look like. And also that when young people are in there and they make a mistake, I remember I had a right to release within the first few weeks of me being there. But I remember I sat in there for months.
Why?
With the right to release because I didn't have an adult that could come and pick me up. So it wasn't just about that. It was actually, and like I said, with the status offenses, keeping people on the inside as well.
Yeah.
And so those are some of the like harsh realities that that folks kind of are really needing resources for other things inside of their life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What kind of resources is that going to take? Because you're talking about trying to create community-driven solutions, talk to youth, see what would actually work for them, alternatives to what we have now, because the system as we have it obviously has some issues. There might be disagreement about what those are, but there are troubling aspects of it. So that is going to take some kind of resources. What kind of a scale are we talking about here, and where would they come from?
I mean, some of the solutions that I know that young people have expressed was economic opportunities. That's something that's, one thing that a lot of young folks that are growing up here in San Francisco, they can't live here when you turn 18.
Right.
Where do you go? Maybe other places, maybe somebody is able to get a business or something, but there are a lot of entrepreneurs in San Francisco with brilliant ideas, innovative ideas, and it's about like who's going to invest in them to be able to take them to their next opportunity. There has been discussion about mental health services and what's that look like that are not systemic ones, that they're able to tailor their own kind of healing plans almost. So it's like having therapists of color, having other non-traditional, like Western forms of mental health services available for them. So there's been discussions about that, reunification with children, support for parents. There's a lot of things that folks are coming up with.
the center has this 10-year strategy to end the criminalization and incarceration of young women, trans young men, and gender expansive people. Can you talk a little bit about some of the main points in that? What do young people need in San Francisco right now to, not be criminalized in the way that we've talked about today?
Yeah, so one of the ways that we're doing it is through the Freedom Charter that was actually modeled after the South African Freedom Charter. So what it is it's kind of like our North Star of where we're heading to. And so what happened was there was over 200 to 300 young folks that came together, system impacted folks. What they did, it's really interesting how it came about, because they started telling this story of this person, this system impacted person, but what was developed at the end of it was what we're asking for. And so you can also check it out online. It's our Freedom Charter, and it really talks about our strategy of how to get there to Freedom 2030.
Okay. You want to give any main points?
Yeah, one of the ones is the right to be free from interpersonal violence and system violence. There's the right to be able to hear, touch, and see our children and have input on where they go or if they're with us. There's also about free from violence of gender. And yeah, I would want to read them off because they definitely go way more into depth, but it's the right to have even housing. And one thing that happens when you are system impacted is you're always compromising your dignity to be housed. So one of the things is to be able to really have access to housing with dignity as well.
Well, I'd love to talk with you some more, but thank you so much for making the time today.
Yeah, thanks.
That was Julia Arroyo-Guzman, Site Director for the Young Women's Freedom Center. I'm Laura Wenis, and you've been listening to Civic. Before I let you go today, at the Public Press, which is Civic's parent organization, we've been working really hard during this pandemic to pursue angles we're not seeing much coverage of elsewhere, or to take a more systemic look at the issues that are surfacing in the headlines. The San Francisco Public Press is a nonprofit, and we're inspired by the public radio model. That's the idea that people who are able to support the work that we do so everyone can have access to it without paywalls or ads. If you think we're onto something, we'd very much appreciate if you could show your support. You can do that by going to sfpublicpress.org/donate, or by helping us get the word out about this show. Subscribe on whichever podcast platform you use, or leave us a review. It really does help, so thank you.